Hi students, in this video we're going to look at the declining balance method of depreciation. So we've already looked at straight line depreciation. This one is a slightly bit more complicated to figure out, but still not bad at all. So let's look at our transaction. On January 4, we purchased equipment for $100,000. The residual value is $20,000. And the useful life is 5 years. Now, perhaps the most important thing you would need to remember about the declining balance method is that we treat residual value differently. We do not deduct residual value at the beginning of our calculations. Instead, we have a hard cutoff for depreciation expense in that we have to leave the residual value to be at least $20,000. So let's say that we get to a calculation and our depreciation expense would be $10,000, and that brings the residual to, or the carrying amount, to 18. Well, you can't record that $10,000 because it brings your carrying amount below 20. You have to reduce your depreciation, and then if you still believe that 20 is the right number for residual value, you actually stop depreciating that equipment. So we're going to look at two sort of different variations of declining balance. First, basic declining balance, which means every year depreciation is reduced. So it is a straight up percentage of the balance as it gets lower and lower. So let's first do that one. So on the declining balance method, note that again, we do not deduct the $20,000 off the bat. We say, okay, we're starting with 100,000. Now we need a rate. Note that the useful life is 5 years. Well, all we do is we say, here's 100%, here's 5 years, and we're going to take 100% divided by 5, and that's 20. So the declining balance rate is 20% per year on the carrying amount. That's going to give you more depreciation at the beginning, and it's going to get lower every year, hence the name declining balance. Now, I've gone ahead and constructed a table for this. So unlike straight line depreciation that is the same for every full year, you have to make a table to figure out what that depreciation will be as it gets lower and lower every year. So I'll just explain this table, and you could do your own. If you're at home and you have access to Excel, try and replicate this table and make sure you can do it easily enough. So we start with our carrying value of 100, and our depreciation expense is based on 20% of that carrying value. So of course the first year is easy. It's purchased on January 4. It's a full year, therefore, and 100,000 times 20% is 20,000. So here I have a column for accumulated depreciation. Now, it's the first time we have depreciation expense, so accumulated depreciation is 20, and that leaves us a carrying value of 80,000. So, first year's depreciation is simply 20,000. So there's the 20. Now for year 2, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the $80,000, I'm going to multiply by 20%, and I'm going to get 16,000. Now you'll note that accumulated depreciation is now 36. Last year's 20 plus this year's 16. So 36,000 is accumulated depreciation, and our carrying value is 80,000 minus the year of 16. This year's 16 is 64,000. So before we let's do it. Let's pop that number in there. Here's our 16,000 for year 2. Oops. And then so on for year 3, 4, and 5. And then presumably we're going to sell this equipment, and we'll be looking at some future videos on how to calculate and record the sale of equipment. So here I've extended this table to the full 5 years, and what we can see is that the carrying value after 5 years using the declining balance method is 32.7 and change. That means we did not go as low as 20, so we don't have to worry about cutting off depreciation expense at our residual of 20. However, in your accounting class, you have probably heard of a variation of this method called double declining balance. And this is a faster decline, a faster depreciation with more depreciation expense at the early life of the equipment and much less at the end. So you would use this method if the sort of usability of the asset declined quickly, or if you wanted to depreciate more of it at the beginning and less at the end. So I've left this table blank because we need to be able to figure out how this plays out over the 5 years. So let's just build this table and see what we have. So first of all, when we talk about double declining balance, that means double the straight line rate. So again, here is 100, let's say 100%. Here's our 5 years. So we went 100% divided by 5 is 20. Double is simply times 2. So we have 20% times 2, and that means our double declining balance rate is 40%. So you can see right away, instead of having 20,000 for the first year depreciation, we have 40,000. So 100,000 times 40% is 40,000. Now it's the first year, so accumulated depreciation is also 40,000. And if we take our 100,000 and we deduct the current year depreciation, we have carrying value of 60. Now for year 2 then, it's based on 60. So we're going to take our carrying value of 60. We're going to multiply by, in this case I'm using 0.4, which is 40%. And there's our amount for year 2. So our accumulated depreciation is the 40 we had before, plus the new amount of 24. So there's our accumulated depreciation. And our carrying value is the 60,000 minus current year depreciation of 24. So now we have 36. So let's do one more year and see what happens. Now to do one more year, I think I've got this set up in an equation. I can probably just copy this down. Okay, which is 36,000 times 40% is 14.4, which is accumulated depreciation of 78.4 and a carrying value of 21.6. So here we get to dealing with the residual value of 20,000. You cannot have a lower carrying value than the residual. So we did not deal with it at the beginning of the calculation. Instead, we're dealing with it at the end. We're saying we can't go under 20. So the lowest number you can have here is 20,000. Now I'm going to take this away, but just to show you, I mean, if I took the 21.6 and I multiplied by 40%, I would have 8,640 depreciation, which should give me a carrying value of 12,960. So I can't go under 20, so that means I can't have 8,640 depreciation in year 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this backwards. I'm going to take 20,000 as the lowest I can go, and then I'm going to say, well, I'm going to take last year's carrying value minus the lowest of 20, and that's $1,600 depreciation in year 4. So you see how the double declining balance will often cut into your residual, and you'll have to back off on your depreciation expense. So, if you still think that 20,000 is the right amount for residual, then your year 5 depreciation is a 0 because you can't go under 20. Now, companies do sometimes revise the years of useful life, and they revise the residual value, because if you have better information, you use the better information. However, maybe you might consider this good news. That is a topic that we do in intermediate financial accounting. So if you go on to intermediate, you will see a revision of depreciation rates as part of that course. So one last thing to do then here, which is look at a partial year amount for declining balance depreciation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and we're going to instead assume that this was purchased on May 20. So from the previous video, you know that if something is purchased between the 1st and the 15th, you round down. If it's purchased between the 16th and the end of the month, you round up. So May 20 falls in the rounding up section. So that means we do not count May. So January, February, March, April, May, 5 months we don't count. We do count the other 7 months. So keep that in mind. We're going to count 7 months of depreciation. Now, I will tell you that there are more difficult ways to do this than the one I'm going to show you. And you may be looking at a textbook with a more difficult way, but this is the easiest way, and it's also accurate. So I would recommend that you calculate partial year depreciation using the declining balance or double declining balance method this way. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start again with my carrying value, and I'm noting that I have to depreciate 7 months of this in the first year. So what we're going to do, using double declining balance and the 40% rate, we're going to take our 100,000, we're going to multiply by 40%, as you can see in the screen, but then I'm going to multiply that times 7 for 7 months divided by 12. So as you can see in the screen, this is 7/12 of the yearly amount. And here's where we get to some, slightly odd numbers, which usually happens if you get partial year depreciation here. So this becomes depreciation expense for the first year. So there's my first year. Now, as we did before, we're going to calculate accumulated depreciation, and we're going to calculate the new carrying amount. So take away the 23, and our carrying amount here is 76 and change. Okay, this is as easy as it gets. At this point, we know the carrying amount is there, just short of 77,000. We know that year 2 is a full year, so we just go ahead and do what we were doing before, which is carrying amount times 40%. And that's our depreciation expense for year 2. Now our accumulated depreciation is current year plus the previous year, and our new carrying amount is the previous carrying amount deduct current year depreciation. So there's 46,000. Now, I think we can do one more year here before we get stopped by the residual of 20. So let's just do this. Now, this is all based on a formula, so I'm just going to copy it down. If you're doing this at home, you could still take 46,000 times 40%, and that would be your yearly depreciation. So notice I'm at 27.6. And before I forget, let's just finish our entry for the second year. was the second year amount. Okay, now year 3 is 18,400, so we could just continue with our journal entry and do year 3. Let's see where year 4 takes us. It takes us to a carrying value of 16,560. So notice this is the same problem we had before. The bottom is, or let's say the floor is $20,000. So it can't go lower than 20,000. So I'm going to put in 20,000 here. And if I go from 27,600 to 20, then my yearly depreciation for year 4 is that previous carrying amount minus the 20, and that's my year 4 depreciation. And once again, year 5 is 0. So we have now calculated partial year depreciation using the double declining balance method. It's as easy as that. And we have one more video coming up in which we'll look at the units of production depreciation method.